just get started. So today, our first will join us by the team, our RxJS team, which is Ben and Jen. They'll be with us in a second. Hello, Jen.
Hi. Hi,
Ben.
Ricardo.
Hey, can you hear me
Hey,
all
Ben.
right?
Yeah.
So thanks, Ricardo, for helping us today. Meet Ben. Ben meets Ricardo. So he'll be around to help us most of today. Okay, so right. I think I mentioned to you that this is like the like 1 year anniversary of when we actually met in Austin to talk about this event.
Yeah, I
So
saw that. Saw that
it's
picture there.
interesting. Yeah, it wasn't planned, obviously, because when we canceled in March, we picked the date and didn't realize that it's actually a year from when we actually talked about this when I stopped by Austin on the way to Mexico. So it's very interesting.
Yeah,
How's your day?
How's
Yeah.
my day going? It's not even day yet.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's still nighttime here, pretty much.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, so
it's a bit early. It's a bit
yeah,
early.
so to folks watching us, it's around, I think, 6 a.m. where you are, Ben.
Yeah, just past 6. So
Yeah, well, while it's time here in London, so we're okay.
yeah.
So what time did you get up, actually?
About 5.
Five.
Well,
Got it.
the alarm went off at 5. I actually probably rolled out of bed maybe like much later than that, but yeah, it was about 5 o'clock. Here in a little bit, like everyone else is sleeping. Here in a little bit, I'll have to go help get my 3 kids ready for virtual school, and yeah, it's pretty early here.
So what have you got in store for us later? Are there gonna be a lot of announcements?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot, and in fact, I'm still thinking of things that I'm like, maybe I should have added that, but no, it would be too long. There's a lot going on in the community right now, so I'm excited to talk about those things.
Great, and we've got a good lineup of talks, and some wonderful speakers will be joining us today. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Before you start with talk, I'd like to make a few announcements. I remember we discussed some things yesterday about some events. So if I can do that, right. Hang on a second. So I just want to actually let everyone know that we're planning to have another RxJS live on air, but it's going to be for Asia. So it's obviously going to be a different time zone from what we're doing now. And Ben and I discussed this yesterday. As soon as it's possible to have physical events again, so obviously we don't know when that's going to happen. We will attempt to do an RxJS Live Europe and RxJS Live Asia as well. And hopefully we'll see you all in person, by that time. And that's it. So over to you, Ben.
Okay.
All right. Well, if we're ready, I'll get started. This particular talk is something that I'm more excited about everybody else's talk, because this is something for me. Like, this is something I've got my head in all the time, and everybody else is, I think, teaching you something or showing you something cool. I'm going to be talking about the state of RxJS, the things we've got coming up, and that sort of thing. I'm super bummed out that this couldn't be in person, because I love meeting all the people that use RxJS, because especially in these times, I kind of live in a little bubble, and it's easy to forget like the people that are using this to build cool things. So, all right. Again, my name is Ben Lesh. I'm a senior engineer at Citadel. I'm the RxJS team lead. I used to be on the Angular team, and before that I was at Netflix. The goals, just so people understand the goals of RxJS. RxJS is a utility library, and it's built around observables primarily. We're trying to be as stable and dependable as possible. We want to make sure that people have smooth updates between versions, and really want to try to improve your developer experience as time goes on. And Also, and this is very important to me, is try to make RxJS as small and fast as we possibly can. So a little news, just to catch up, like RxJS is still growing. The last time I did a talk like this, I was like, oh, wow, it's 18 million downloads a week. It's now at like 22 million downloads, or 22.6, I guess, million downloads on NPM per week, which is pretty interesting. But just to remind you, you could write a bot that did that, right? Like I could write a bot that just downloaded from NPM over and over again, and I could get like, I don't know, a zillion downloads per week. I'm sure they'd rate limit me at some point, but it seems to be going up organically. So it just shows that usage has grown. RxJS 7 has been in beta for a while. You can install it, and I really, really do recommend trying this in your code bases as soon as you possibly can. Believe it or not, like this is something that the RxJS 7 beta is something that Google is using in production. So this is a very, very, we're trying for a very smooth transition with minimal breaking changes. So what's new in version 7, improved stability, and I'll get to what that actually means. It's not that RxJS 6 is unstable or it's going to explode or it's radioactive or anything. We're trying to get better TypeScript support. So typings are hard in functional libraries, and we're trying to get that as right as we possibly can in this version. We've added some new functionality I'll talk about in a little bit. We've deprecated a lot of stuff over the years, but we haven't removed anything. So even stuff that was deprecated way back in version 5 is still in there, because we're trying not to break folks, and we'll be removing those deprecations in the next major version. And new that in recent, like the last month or so, is we've done a lot of work to make it a lot smaller. So improved stability. What do I mean by that? We're partnering with Google to make sure we have smooth releases. And what that means is everything that goes into master on GitHub for RxJS, before it's even published to NPM, periodically is synced into Google 3. So that's their internal monorepository. And that means that they have like an internal pull request that runs the tests and runs this code basically against thousands and thousands and thousands of targets that use RxJS inside of Google, because they're a huge company with lots and lots of code. And we can see if we broke anything with the changes that landed in master. And we work with Google to try to fix things. So if we had to make a breaking change, we work with them to try to fix things on their end or tweak things on our end to make things easier for them to transition. But I really want to thank these two Googlers. These folks have been joining us in our core team meetings and reporting to us about how the sync went when they tried to sync it into Google, and we work with them on what they might need to do on their end or what we need to do on our end. So it's super important work, and because of them, when you update RxJS, you can be more assured that there's not going to be huge problems. We also are moving to the latest. We're already on the latest TypeScript in master, and this means that we can use some of the latest features in TypeScript. Some of them are pretty exciting, and I know that Moshe and Nicholas are going to talk a little bit later about some of the cool stuff they're doing with TypeScript and RxJS. One of the things that is just like, it seems really simple, but it actually was not in previous versions of TypeScript, is the idea of this n argument inference. And what that means is you could have something like of, and like in version 6 or in older versions, you'd get in and you'd be like, oh, well, if I have of and then I pass more than 8 or 9 arguments to it of different types, TypeScript can't really figure out what you meant there. So you get red squigglies, and then worse than that, when you actually examine it, it's like, oh, by the way, this result isn't observable of the wrong thing. Like it's missing a couple of types in the union there. And in version 7, we've fixed that. And this is kind of across the library. We've fixed a lot of these APIs because we have a lot of APIs like this, where we're able to properly infer the types out of all the arguments. We fixed some bad types. So there are some old typings gaffes that have been breaking things for a while. And if we added it ends up being kind of a nasty change for some folks. So we wanted to do it in a major version. One of these in particular is toPromise. So toPromise has always had this behavior, and it was hotly debated even 6 years ago. Like, what should happen if you have an observable that doesn't give you a value and then completes? And the decision was made back then to just be like, oh, well, it's just a promise. You get promise undefined. And that's problematic because then we typed it, or I typed it, or somebody typed it, probably me, back then, to be like, oh, well, toPromise returns promise of T. And that's not true, because really what you're getting is, it could be T, it could also be undefined, because if that observable completes without emitting a value, then it's going to give you undefined. So rather than change the behavior of toPromise, we just typed it properly. So when you update to version 7, you may see this. If you're explicitly typing, or you're expecting an explicit type, it's going to be more honest with you, and it's going to say, hey, this here could be undefined, and you're going to get red squigglies. You can always just say as, in this case, as array of string or whatever. But overall, that's all right, because we want to deprecate toPromise anyways, because we have a couple of replacements for this that are smaller, they're tree shakeable, and they provide a better behavior. And I'll talk about those in just a little bit. Union type returns are so much better. So this is a thing, and actually, I had started doing this in version 6 and with some of the operators, and it ended up breaking some folks. And that's one of the reasons we started getting Google involved with this, and decided to put it off until version 7. But things like concat map. So before, if you had a concat map and you returned, see, I've got returning an observable of string or an observable of number inside of there, it would not get this right. It would just be like, oh, you've got an observable of string. Like, it wouldn't be able to figure out that there was 2 different types returned inside of there. And that's particularly problematic in things like Redux observable or NGRX effects and that sort of thing. So that's all resolved in this new version. And then here's one, this one's extra funny. So we started writing RxJS back in like TypeScript 1.8 or something in TypeScript. And it was a really common pattern in Angular in particular, which is where it used to be most of RxJS was used, and now it's, I think, used more even elsewhere. But there was this issue where you'd have a subject, and you wanted to be able to call next without an argument. And TypeScript didn't handle that very well. So naively, myself or somebody, I'm thinking it was me, made it so the signature was like value is optional. And that means in like RxJS 6, you can create a subject of number and actually call next with nothing on it, right? That's wrong. Like, you shouldn't be able to do that, because now it's a subject at runtime, it's a subject of number or undefined, right? So that's not okay. And we fixed that in RxJS 7. So you can still call it with no arguments if you actually have a subject of void or undefined. So that makes a lot more sense now, and I'm really, really happy that that's fixed. All right, so moving on to what people usually like most, which is new features. One of the new features we have is animation frames. So this is just a little code example to show animation frames. What this does is, and I'm just going to pause it so we can see, what this does is it actually gives you an observable of elapsed time and timestamps. Actually, this is an older version of this. We updated it to include the high resolution timestamp over time. So you can say is from the moment you subscribe to this observable, here's how much time has elapsed, or here's what the actual timestamp is when this is called. And this is really handy for creating animations. And we had ways to do this before, but it was weird. You had to know this recipe. Like, I'm going to call interval with 0 and give it an animation frame scheduler, or range to 0 to positive infinity, or whatever. Like, all of these roughly did the same thing. And the fact is that it's kind of gross that you had to do this, because you had to know internal implementation details of these different creation functions. So that's not great. And now you've just got animation frames. And not to mention, before, when you were doing this, you probably also had to map it into something and capture like the start time and a defer, and figure out all these things like to get the actual time elapsed, and now you just have it. So that's a new thing in version 7. We have new, and this is the replacement for toPromise, new promise conversion functions. These are nice because they are tree shakeable. The first one I'll show you is last value from. So this is the equivalent of toPromise. And what this does is you just pull it in, and then you pass your observable to it, and it returns to you a promise. So you can await it. Same basic principle as toPromise, with the difference in that you can say, oh, well, if my observable doesn't complete, it's actually going to reject with an empty error. So you can, if you know that your observable definitely gives you a value, you don't have to worry about this try catching. But if you don't know if your observable is going to give you a value, now you can actually catch that problem in like a more elegant way and handle it appropriately. So we have that one, and also we have first value from. Because I've found that quite frequently, really, people have like an observable of one value, or they just want the first value from whatever, some streaming thing to know when something starts, and they need a promise for, whatever promise API they're dealing with, async await or some older API or something. This is the same principle. It's just when you get the first value, it immediately resolves the promise, unsubscribes from the source, and if it completes without emitting a value, you still get that rejected empty error. But I just want to remind people, when it comes to these promise-based APIs, you only want to use these when necessary if you're really trying to embrace the reactive code and cancellation, because you're going to lose cancellation. In the future, we're probably going to add support for things like abort signal through the library, in which case these two functions would be able to accept an abort signal, and you would be able to cancel those things. But right now, you're going to lose cancellation if you use these. So async iterable support. That's another thing that's new in the library. The async iterable support is basically this. So if you have async function star in modern JavaScript, you get back what is an async iterable. So I just want to make sure I wasn't getting other messages here because my phone is buzzing. I'm very sorry. I just want to make sure I was still online and talking to people because I can't see an audience in front of me. In modern JavaScript, you have this async function star, and what that enables you to do is actually await things, but also yield. And what this is going to return is kind of like a promise-based generator of sorts, which is called an async iterable. You get an iterator of promises to iteration results under the hood. But it just makes an interesting way. So I can make this async ticker this way, where I'm saying, okay, well, start this forever loop. And every single time we hit like here, I want to wait for 100 milliseconds, and then I'm going to yield a message. And I can actually convert that now to an observable by just using that literally inside of concat_map or anything that would normally accept a promise or observable or iterable or whatever. So it automatically, RxJS will automatically convert async iterables to observables. And how it does that is it looks for symbol async iterator. You can find more information about what that is on MDN, but it's very similar to symbol iterator, which designates something as an iterable. And there's a lot of places that we can do this. You can do some interesting things. Like here, I'm using it with defer. So this is like, hey, get the user, and then after we get the user, I want to start listening for user messages over and over and over again. And I can make an observable out of that. And then I can unsubscribe it, and it'll cancel this whole thing. And it's super interesting. It's fun to play with. I recommend trying it out. On the other side of that, we decided that we weren't going to make observables directly into async iterables because there's so many different ways to convert them. So I took that work, and I published a library called async for await. And what this enables you to do is it enables you to subscribe to observables with the same way that you would use an async iterable, which is to use like a for await loop, or you can use it in any other API that accepts an async iterable. And what that looks is like this. You can have, there's 4 different functions. It's each value from. would just get each value from the source. So it would go through the loop, take however long it needed to, and there's a buffer under there that builds up. And then as it comes back around, it takes the next one off the buffer, and then deals with that, and then it takes the next one off the buffer, and so on. Buffered values from is the same sort of idea, but it gives you the entire buffer every single time it gets around to the back of the start of the loop. Latest value from just gives you the most recent value that's arrived, or waits for a value to arrive if it doesn't have one, and then it gives it to you. And then next value from always waits for the next value to arrive before it goes. So it doesn't give you the previous one, but it will. Both of those last two will drop anything that happens while you're in the middle of that loop. So the thing about async await is, I could be awaiting a bunch of very long things inside of one of these loops. So it takes a while to get back around to the start. So it's there. I think there's kind of a lot of foot guns to using async iterables in general that people might not understand. But this is a super interesting, super cool pattern. And again, it's at async for await is the library that you can use to try this stuff out. If you're interested in async iterables, there's also a sister or cousin library to RxJS, which is IXJS, which is built entirely around async iterables. One thing I will say, though, for the Angular users out there is sorry, this isn't really for Zones, because Zones is unable to monkey patch the native promises that come out of async await. So if you're using async iterators or async await, as you probably already know, you may have some problems there with Zones. All right, so another small feature, and there's a bunch of little features like this, but this is one that a lot of people ask for, is like retry, reset on success. This is a situation where before, the old behavior was you'd say retry 3 times, and even if it was successful after it retried the first time, it'd only retry 2 more times. Reset on success just means, hey, if I get a successful value through after a retry, take the counter back to 3. So the next time I retry, I've got 3 more retries. So we also are kind of undeprecating some of the deprecated operators. So we had an operator concat, an operator with named merge, and so on. We decided to just name them like concat with, merge with, zip with, because people were still using them a lot. So before you would have like zip or combine latest or concat or whatever, and now you would just call the same thing only with on the end. And we're still deprecating those other operators, just we're renaming them. So we do have a lot of deprecations, but we haven't really removed anything again here. Like result selectors still around. Those were deprecated in like version 5. We haven't removed those yet. Scheduler arguments, we're deprecating most of those, and this has been talked about. There's a scheduled thing that you should use, or use like observe on or whatever. Those are deprecated, and there's reasons for that. Like having these schedule arguments kind of bloats the code, because you end up with 2 code paths, like one for when you have a scheduler and one for when you don't. So that's why this is there. You want to use scheduled or observe on, or subscribe on is another one sometimes you want to use, but this is the way that you should be dealing with schedulers if you can. We also deprecated some subscription signatures, and this might be surprising to people, but this is the way that you would call subscribe or tap. What we want you to do is either pass one function or one object. And basically it's like this. There's several reasons, but the biggest one, in my personal opinion, is it's understandable when you say subscribe and just one function. Here, I'm dealing with the values that are coming out of this. But it's more understandable to be like, oh, if I only care about error, having an object where it says error and you put the function in there, or when you only care about complete, having an object worth complete and the function in there, and so on. What's not great is when you have to do like counting in your head to figure out like, oh, this one was next, and then the null is error, and so this one must be complete. It's not wonderful. And then internally in the library, that means that all we have to do is check and say, did you give us a function or did you give us an object? And then we know what to do with it, instead of having a lot of logic to figure out like, did you give me 3 functions or did you give me 2 functions? Or, it's not the best. So this is a cleanup, and it's kind of a code health thing. I recommend, even if we weren't going to deprecate these things, I would still recommend using subscribe like this. And the same thing for tap. I mean, it's exactly the same problem. It's just better if you use it this way. It's more readable, I think, for folks. All right. So we also want to reduce the scheduler footprint. And just to understand what that means, if you use an operator like share replay, you actually end up including a bunch of scheduler stuff, like 2K of scheduler stuff for share replay, because it was using replay subject under the hood, which used a scheduler, a replay, like replay subject used a scheduler. And this happens in a bunch of different places. But we decided to create this new concept called a timestamp provider. And really, it's just an interface. And the reason for this is operators like replay subject, it was taking a scheduler and defaulting to a particular scheduler, but all it really cared about was the now timestamp of what was on the scheduler. So it was adding a lot of weight for something that you could just pass performance or date to, right? Like those are built in. So we've kind of refined that a little bit. Schedulers will still work here because they are timestamp providers. They have a now method on them. It's not a breaking change. It's just something to be aware of that we changed to try to kind of make things lighter weight. And it also provides you the opportunity to do things like pass just performance or date or some other small object with a now method on it that you might have to things like replay subject. All right, so this one's new, just in the last few months, but we finally removed this unintuitive subscription API around add and improved the API around remove. A lot of people thought that you could chain this together because they get real excited about fluent APIs and they're like, oh, I love Java or whatever. And they decide that they're gonna be like, okay, I got this new subscription and then I'm gonna add this to it and then I'm gonna add this to it. And then when I call unsubscribe, they're surprised that it only prints third. And there's a reason for this, and I'll get to that in a second. But like basically, it was never meant to be chained. Each one of these ads returns a different subscription that is the child subscription. So in version 7, if you try to do this, you're going to get an error because you can't accidentally do this weird thing anymore with subscription. And the reason for that is just returns void now. It's just a plain old function that doesn't return anything. And the other thing that we added is we added the ability to actually be able to add and remove. So before you could always add a function to a subscription, but there was no real convenient way to remove it. You had to capture the return and pass that to remove. Now you can actually keep a handle to your function and pass the same one to add and remove, and it will add and remove them. So the API just makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot more, I think, intuitive for folks. Because before, in version 6, if you try to do that, it wouldn't work because remove only accepted subscriptions. You could add subscriptions or remove subscriptions from a parent subscription, but you couldn't do that with a function. You can only add it, because what you had to do is you had to add it, capture the child subscription, and this is the thing people were trying to chain in that other example, and then use that to remove this handler. So it's just this weird API, and we finally got rid of that and moved to something that makes more sense in version 7. So I'm very happy about that. Another new thing, and this one hasn't been published yet because we're kind of waiting on the PR around the smaller version to land, but you can now configure unhandled errors. And so what this means is before, if you had an error, like say I wrote an observable like the one you see on the bottom here, where I call subscriber error once, that's fine. But if I call subscriber error 2 more times, it's not going to notify the consumer anymore because you're only allowed to call error 1 time. So this is wrong. This is a poorly written thing. And before, what we did was we actually did like a console warn. And that's really gross because now like I, as a library author, am polluting your console that, I don't know what you want to do with it, but certainly you don't want me putting warns in there without your say so. And the appropriate thing to do would be give this some sort of way to actually handle this thing. So for one, we made this default to actually throw and host report error in a different stack. So if I do either one of these 2 things in version 7, it's actually going to throw the error in a set timeout by default. And you're able to configure this throwing in a set timeout behavior with this config on unhandled error. So this just is pulled in straight from the RxJS import, and you can set a function here. And this is also always called in its own like set timeout, in its own context. So you can't accidentally throw an error in here and have it unwind the stack back into RxJS and break something. But this, even if you have an unhandled error from you didn't provide an error handler and an error made it down there, you can configure this spot to handle that. But at the same time, you could also configure, window on error or whatever to handle that as well. The people who are using RxJS and Node want to particularly note this because if you're doing something like this and it will now start throwing on a different call stack, some node processes people have wired up to be like, oh, if I get any errors, unhandled errors, I want to exit the process. So it's important to note, but for web users in particular, this is a non-issue, other than you'll start seeing these errors reported to you so you can deal with them. All right, Ajax improvements. This was kind of a sleeper. I personally actually went in and did a lot of work on trying to fix our Ajax implementation. We've had it for a long time. There's a lot of weird quirks and bugs, a lot of bugs reported in our issues, in our backlog. Here's the thing, like this is now all of the features of it are pretty comparable with Axios or some of the other contemporaries right now. There's a couple more features that we're going to try to land soon, and some improvements. But really, we just addressed a lot of quirks and bugs and made the implementation smaller. If you were to just use RxJS only for the Ajax implementation, which is weird, but like, let's just say that you're like, I don't care about observables, but I do want this Ajax helper for my code, it's under 10K. So to put that in perspective, Axios is like 17K, and it's fairly small. So it's a really, really lightweight thing. But if you're already using RxJS and you need an Ajax implementation, you're only paying like 2 or 3K to get Ajax built in there, because you'd have all of these other types already, subscriber and subscription and the config, observable, all that stuff. So it's super lightweight. It's pretty useful, and it's better than it's ever been. So I just wanted to call that out so people know about it. And just to show you the basic usage, because I don't think it's widely used, particularly because the Angular community has their own implementation. You can just call it like this. You get an observable back. This is kind of the basic, kitchen sink, configure it however you want. You can set headers and do that sort of thing, deal with cores. Or you can call it with like get JSON, and it automatically converts things to JSON and so on and so forth. So it does most of that for you out of the box with a get by just examining the headers that come back. And using some of the default behaviors from XHR, but I really wanted to call this out because I don't think a lot of people know about this or use it, and it's lightweight and it's getting better. We also, of course, have from fetch. If people don't know about that, you can go check that out. And it's just a lightweight wrapper around fetch. It's actually even smaller than this. So if you like the fetch API, but you want observables, there you go. All right, so this is the part of the talk that I suppose anybody that follows me on Twitter has probably been waiting for the most, which is I want to talk about RxJS actually getting smaller. So in version 6.6.3, which is current latest version, if you were to bundle it with Webpack, like the entire library, like everything, the kitchen sink, you bundled every little thing, and this excludes the testing stuff. I didn't put the testing stuff in here, but all of the stuff you might use at runtime, you're looking at 94 kilobytes, which is sizable for a utility library. It really is. And like, again, this is if you bundle everything. And the blue section that you see here, that represents just the operators, like only like map and filter and all these other like supporting types, and Ajax and WebSockets and those sorts of things. So this is just the operators, and that was weighing at like 52 kilobytes. And so I had started this off like thinking, man, if I can just get that under like 35 kilobytes, that would be amazing if I could get it under that. And what ended up happening is through a lot of work, and there's a big PR that I have out for this, I was able to get it down to under to just over 22 kilobytes for all of the operators. And that's like if you used every single operator like a crazy person, that's what you would pay in terms of that. And then the other stuff has been shrunk down to about to lessen that. But in total, it's 57 kilobytes for everything. Again, if you were to bring in every single thing from RxJS, which I don't really think anyone should do or want to do, this is what you would pay, which is in fact smaller than Lodash, so by like 10K. So it's a substantial savings. And I think in most people's cases, they would see this side a lot smaller and this side over here be just a hair smaller. So you're probably looking at, 20 kilobytes or maybe in the teens somewhere or something like that, depending on what you're pulling in. So the other thing about this is it's faster. I was actually concerned that some of this would not be faster, but as it turns out, less code generally executes faster. That's not always true, but so here on the left-hand side, I have this kind of stress test where I ran most of the common operators that I use over and over and over again on like every time I click this button, and it averaged out to about 700 milliseconds or so. And on the other side, I did the exact same code, like drop in place with what is in the PR to reduce the size of RxJS. And it is measurably faster. It works out to about 575 milliseconds on average. I tried it with a little bit harder core stress test where it was just like, all right, let's just really spike this thing. And again, both of these are running against the same code. It's just different versions of RxJS. And it was like 7.1 seconds versus 5.7 seconds. So it is faster. I will say that the memory pressure here is a little bit higher than it is here, but not by much. And it garbage collects very quickly. So I don't have any concerns there, but it was something I was keeping an eye on because there's so much more closure and, kind of ephemeral functions that are being created on this side. All right. So because I was given some extra time here because of the other time slot, I am going to attempt to live code exactly what was done in order to reduce the size of the operator. So I'm kind of glad that Jan Nicholas went before me to kind of talk about operators and their internal structure and that sort of thing. And wish me luck because this is again inaudible. I'm going to increase the size of this a little bit. So what I've got here is I'm pulling in these two operators, and what these operators are is I've copied and pasted the exact implementations of these operators from RxJS 6. So I've got map here, I've got filter here, and what I want to do, and I'm going to change the size of this just a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't screw anything up too bad. You can see that I'm running this code here. Oop, not that code. That's HTML. I am running that too technically, but here we've got. I've just got this observable of numbers 1 through 6. I'm filtering it to the even numbers, and then I'm mapping it to add some exclamation points to it. And you can see the printout over here. Now, this map implementation ended up being about I think in total it was like 500 kilobytes or something like that when it's all minified and bundled. I'm just going to take a drink of water here real quick. Sorry. All right. So this whole bit here, we talked about what an operator is and that sort of thing. When you call map, it goes in here and it returns this map operation function that is just a function that takes an observable and returns an observable. And then when you call that, it is calling lift on the source observable and passing in this operator. Now, operator is this interesting thing where it has this interface that always has a call method on it. And a call method takes subscriber and source. But here's the thing. If you're looking at this in JavaScript land, what else has a call method? Function has a call method, right? So if I wanted to create an operator that wasn't this big class, I could, in theory, just say, all right, well, what happens if I replace this? And like literally I could take this bit here, copy it, go over here and paste it into a function like so. All right, sorry. Now I'm freaking out. I don't know what happened there. My computer locked up on me. All right, so where I could take this function, this is my subscriber here, and my source. I don't like any. It shouldn't have been any. I don't know why it's typed as any. It should be observable key. Now we don't need this anymore because I can literally just take this bit, put it here, and this comes from closure. This comes from closure, and this is this. All right. So now this is exactly the same thing as it was before, and I can get rid of that. And you can see when I save this, that runs the code. It's fine. I'll just refresh to make sure. Ta-da, looks exactly the same. And I don't need this anymore. So I can delete this. Right. And now I'm left with this map subscriber. Now, map subscriber, if you look at the implementation under the hood, when you pass a destination to it, like if I was going to go and implement a map myself like this, you'd end up with something where you pass to it like this observer. I type. All right. You pass to it this observer, and you are going to end up being like, okay, on next, I get a value, and then you inside of it would do all of this stuff where you end up calling destination next, and destination is the next observer down the chain. So it would be like subscriber next, whatever. But then like for every single one of these things, you end up having to, if I wanted to make like a pass-through observer, it ends up like this. And then you have to do error, make sure that subscriber gets error called on it and whatever. Like you end up having to do this for next, error, and complete. And subscriber under the hood just says, oh, well, here's my destination. So automatically I'm going to wire up next, error, and complete to just pass through to this destination. So that's what happens inside of here and inside of the subscriber implementation. So right here, we're just overriding that behavior to be like, oh, when I get a next, I want to try catch around this projection method that we got from, or this projection function we got from the user, call it appropriately. And if we're successful, take the result and next it to the destination. Or if we're not successful, error. So that's what this is doing in there. So I looked at this and we have these different subscribers for every single operator around. Like in filter here, which I'm going to do next, it's got its own subscriber and so on. So I thought, what is a cool way that I could do this in a way that would make it generic? Because one of the things that we're doing here is we're doing this so we can pass project as like a member, and then we call it. But now that, and we started doing this actually back in version 5 because it was so much faster in older versions of V8. But newer versions of V8 handle closures so much better that it's not as big of a win anymore. So what we can do is I decided I could create a new, let me get in a new file here. I'll call it operator subscriber. And this is going to need subscriber. And this just is a class that extends subscriber in such a way that we have a constructor, we still get a destination. That'll be a subscriber of any. And we still pass that along. So everything gets wired up automatically. But we can make it so we can override next. And we just simply say like, okay, well, give me this on next function, right? It takes a value and returns void. But it's optional. And in the event that we actually get one of these, we can just say if we have on next, and this, we can just patch this and we can say, all right, so there, or in this case, I'm just going to say put on next in there. All right, so this is just a start. So if I take this and I bring in my operator subscriber, I now have this weird ability to be like, okay, I don't need this anymore. What I'm going to do is say new operator subscriber. And I'm just going to make this more clear. Destination. I'm going to pass the destination here. And now I can override my next method, which is the only thing I was overriding here, in exactly the same way. I can even, in fact, copy and paste this if I want. I'm going to have to change a couple things, obviously, but this is going to be an arrow function. Don't need that anymore. Don't need that anymore. Need to have this count. I'm going to call it index because it's the index that gets passed in. Let me format this a bit. Destination. Destination. This is unnecessary now. And this is unnecessary. Oh, I'm missing stuff. What is it? I'm missing that, maybe. Who do you belong to? Maybe copy and pasting wasn't the best idea. All right, so format that. We still don't have the index, and I'm missing something else. Oh my gosh, why did I copy and paste that? All right, just to make this simpler on myself. Value comes in here. Close. Better? No? What are you looking for? Expecting a comma. Why are you expecting a comma? Open, close. What am I doing? Oh my gosh. Everyone's probably screaming at their monitors right now. It's right there, Ben. What are you doing? Let's see. Where is it expecting a comma? Because this? No, that can't be right. Open, close, open, close, open, close. I'm going to cheat and look at the speaker thing. No, speakers aren't even responding. And lift is not closed. There we go. Better. All right. I'm just going to take the guts of this as opposed to what I was trying to do before and project. You don't need this. You don't need that. And you need that. Right. So let's organize that. We don't have count yet. Actually don't like the name of that very much. I'm going to change that to index because that's how it's passed to the function index. Right. So now we have the whole thing kind of in line here, and we don't need this function anymore, or this class anymore. And that's really cool. Like we did this. So that's great. Now what about filter? I'm going to go look at filter really quick. Save this. And filter, we're going to need to do more of the exact same sort of work. So I've got all this filter operator and stuff underneath here. What we're going to do is I'm going to go here and say, all right, lift takes the source in a function where this is a subscriber key. And the source, this is actually the lifted source. There's an observable key. And let me see now. Oh my God. Killing myself. Expected one argument's got two. Oh, lift is just the operator. Silly me. All right. I know how RxJS works. All right. So, and then in here, we have the same exact sort of deal as what we would do here, where we're going to literally just going to copy and paste this because the subscriber operator is pretty much the same thing. Or the filter function in here, very, very similar. So just to take this and say, all right, although my copying and pasting has not worked out that great lately, we're still going to try it. There. And I need to bring in operator subscriber. And it's not project. This ends up being different. So here we have to call our predicate. And the result is a Boolean. And we'll actually say, if result, and we next the value. So and if you look at this is the same thing as what you'd see down here. We have this result typed as any. That's so sad, Ben. Anyways, we can see everything's working over here. We no longer need any of this stuff. And we've made our library a lot smaller, which is great, but there's more we can do. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, so we're using the same thing in 2 spots. We have try catch, and this pattern exists all over in our operators. I mean, all over. And this try catch here, and I think to myself, like, can I make this smaller? Can I make this better? And since we've centralized all of this now, one thing I can do is I can go back here and be like, well, if I pass this, what if I said in here, I'm gonna try catch this myself and say, if I have an error, then pass it to the destination, or actually have the destination right here in a closure myself. Now, I mean, you see I didn't break anything, but I didn't change anything either. Now, if I go here and I just get rid of this whole thing and just call this directly, I don't need this try catch anymore because I have a try catch that's doing this work for me. I can take this and be like, okay, so that's that. And I don't need this anymore. And well, wait, I'm only using this in one spot. So I can just go like here. And it's already a lot smaller. And if you really want to code golf it, which I desperately do because I'm a weirdo, I can do this here, right? I could remove brackets and all sorts of other stuff, but I've got that, and my filter is a ton smaller now. I can go into map. I can do exactly the same thing where now this doesn't matter as much anymore. But look, I'm only using it in one spot, so just can inline it and so on. And now map is very, very, very small, right? As opposed to that, however long thing. Like here's what filter looked like again. So this is filter before all of this stuff from line 58 down to line 104. So, several lines of code, as opposed to going back over here and, if you're a psycho, this is a one-liner, right? And obviously you can do other things. Like you can make this a arrow function that goes to here, and this is an arrow function that comes here, and so on and so forth to make it lighter weight. But you get the idea. So that's a lot of what these changes are about, and how I was able to really reduce the size of RxJS. The actual underlying architecture itself isn't that much different. It's just that there's been some refactoring on kind of the patterns that we were using under the hood. All right, so I'm going to jump back to this here. Other stuff we have going on, where I've been working on a new guide. If I'm going to just visit this really quick, this guide is just really it's a long time in the making. I don't know why it's taking so long to load. Probably because there's a ton of comments on this one. But you can go in and you can look at some of these files and get an idea of what's in there. It's just things like subscribing to an observable and unsubscribing to an observable. And it goes into great detail, as much detail as I possibly can on these topics, including things like why use an observable at all and those sorts of things. And these will be landing in the docs, as soon as we possibly can have it. So you can actually view the file. But yeah, it needs proofread and whatever. And it's just going to be a much, much more detailed, and hopefully this provides a good starting place for some folks. And about halfway through doing this work, I stopped to make RxJS smaller. So this is another thing I've got going on that I'm pretty excited about. There is, go back. There's reworking of multicasting operators. And just to show that really quick, this is something where we may very much in the future, we may end up with just having 2 operators and like 1 method to create a connectable observable instead of like this huge array of operators. And they're more configurable and they're able to accomplish things that some of these other ones couldn't on their own. So just kind of reduce the API and try to build it in such a way that it makes a little bit more sense. So you can configure the behavior. Does it reset on error? Does it reset on complete? Does it reset on subscribe? And that sort of thing. There's talk around moving to abort signal for cancellations instead of subscriptions, because abort signal is now available in all major browsers, and it's available in this next upcoming version of Node, which means it's everywhere. So there's like a universal means of canceling things, which means we probably shouldn't be shipping our own. But there's still some work and some debate around that. So that's something that's being discussed. There's a PR out to add it, but that's not going to be merged until we really decide exactly how we want to manage that. Another option was maybe using both abort signal and observables for cancellation. So you'd actually, since you already have an observable, you could use an observable to cancel. You don't need a subscription, and that would help reduce the size of the library further and make cancellation more flexible. I mean, think of how flexible take until is, for example. Imagine that being built into every observable. And then there's been discussions about things like, what if observable itself was just its own standalone library? So other libraries could use it and it didn't ship with all of the other operators and these things. So there's a lot of different discussions involved. It's worth going out and looking at the issues labeled discussion and checking some of those out and commenting on it if you have thoughts, but that sort of thing. So how can you help us? For one thing, and this is a really big deal, Nicholas Jamieson wrote this tool where you can anonymously report your usage. It's open source. It's not going to steal your data. You can look at the code and see what it does. What it does is it just kind of crawls through your app and says, what operators are they using? What version of RxJS are they using? What version of TypeScript and those sorts of things. So this is important. And the reason it's important is it gives us an idea of what to prioritize, what to optimize, and what to deprioritize, right? So if, hardly anyone's using window when, then maybe we don't want it taking up so much space, and maybe we even branch it off into its own package or something like that. Just it's something to do to really help us out and help the community out. Documentation always needs updates. There's typos, everything from typos to needing better examples. That's super helpful for us. And then another thing that's super helpful is articles and how-tos and videos and mentorship. And what I mean by mentorship, it honestly is just being kind to people that don't know a lot about RxJS, sitting down with them, helping them understand, being patient with them. It's when someone's confronted with a code base that just is like mountains of Rx code, they have to learn like a new domain-specific language to deal with it. And it's not the friendliest thing. So please be patient and help folks. And part of mentorship is commenting your code well for the next person that comes along. Those sorts of things. You can do research on like ways RxJS is being used or whatever. You can create developer tools. These are things that Nicholas Jamieson has kind of championed for us over the years, but a lot of other people have made some interesting tools for visualizing RxJS and those sorts of things. And then the other thing you can do is create libraries. And there's so many people out there doing this, but there's always a need for like, oh, someone wants a specific bespoke thing about mutation observer in observable. Like, we don't need to add that to RxJS core. It's better if some of those things exist in well-curated, well-documented libraries. And that's really helpful for us as well. So thank you, everybody. And please stay safe this year, as I hope that you all have so far. It's been a crazy year. And I'm I'm sad that I didn't get to see everybody in person again, but very, very happy that this conference is going on, and I'm excited about all these talks. So thanks again.